Hello?
Hi, Jan. I've got the results of the test through. I'm afraid Jessica's got equine lymphosarcoma.
What does that mean? Is she going to be all right?
No, Jan. Jessica's condition is terminal. She's got cancer.
Equine lymphosarcoma is a cancer affecting the white blood cells of horses, and it usually spreads to internal organs as well. And there is no known cure for it, and I discussed her case with other vets and since, and they're of the opinion that no horse has recovered from it.
But all was not lost. Jan Piper had been told about Charles Siddle's healing skills by a racing colleague.
Here, Graham, someone gave me this. Take a look.
What?
It's an animal healer.
That's nice.
My husband's attitude towards healing was, when I suggested we call a healer in, was that it was a load of old poppycock and he didn't want nothing to do with it at all.
It's all nonsense.
Well, we've got nothing to lose. She's going to be put down anyway.
If it makes you feel better, give him a go.
I don't think the people who own Jessica believed that anything would happen.
Good evening. I'm Charles Siddle. You must be Mrs. Piper.
How do you do? Jessica's this way.
Good girl. It's all going to be better soon, don't worry.
I didn't understand what he would do. He was totally sort of relaxed with her and she was relaxed with him.
I can't remember at all how long I was in the actual stable with her.
He was laying his hands all over her and I'd never seen anything like that before, and Jessica didn't seem to mind.
She'll be all right now. Probably she'll be tired, but tomorrow she'll be fine.
Well, thanks for coming anyway.
When Charles left, I mean, Jessica looked no different. And I told my husband he was leaving and he just laughed and said that was a total waste of time.
Well, that's it, old girl. I've tried everything now.
When I left the stable, I knew Jessica would be all right.
The next morning, Jan was in for a surprise.
Jan!
What?
You won't believe it. Jessica's knocking at the door for food.
Jessica? He can't be Jessica. She hasn't eaten in weeks. Jessica! Try her on some hay first, see if she'll eat it.
Here you are.
I couldn't believe it was the same horse. She was well. She was hungry.
It's amazing. I can't believe it. She just looks so much better.
She was just a completely different horse, and I do put it all down. Well, I have to put it all down to what Charles did.
Jessica made a complete recovery, and the following year gave birth to Frank, who already shows racing promise. Today, Jessica is at the stud farm, hoping to conceive another in her line of winners.
By all the laws of veterinary medicine, Jessica should be dead by now, but she's still walking around happy in the field with a foal, and this is something that we cannot explain.
And you might be pleased to know that animal healing has now been given the seal of approval by the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which allows healers to lay hands on animals under the care of a qualified vet. Our ancient and historic monuments often have ancient and historic ghosts to go with them. You can even find them listed in the guidebooks. So far, so good for the tourist business. Our story tonight concerns one such historic site. The occasional tourist would leave terrified after a brief encounter with the supernatural, but that could always be put down to an overheated imagination. But what was more perplexing was the behavior of the overnight visitors, level-headed friends of the family. They often refused point-blank ever to spend another night in the place. They were seeing something that wasn't in the guidebooks. They were seeing the wrong ghost.
Muncaster Castle. Since 1325, it has stood on the northwest coast of England, built to guard the ancient trade routes going south from Carlisle and to watch for invaders coming in from the Irish Sea. The Pennington family have been the lords of Muncaster since the 13th century, when Alan de Penetone was granted the lands of Muncaster by King John. In recent years, the family and friends have been plagued by strange happenings within the walls. Doors open and shut of their own accord. Unknown footsteps walk the corridors. Patrick Gordon Duff Pennington has lived at the castle since he married into the family, but even he feels uncomfortable at times.
Going up in the winter, between the back door and my office, come snow, come hail or shine, every night footsteps used to follow me in the dark in the winter, and I didn't like it one little bit. And the dogs don't like it much either. I've always thought this house was a fairly normal house, but just lately it's become extremely strange.
Horticulturalist Alan Clark also had a bad experience at Muncaster.
Had a quick look outside. Nobody there at all. I then found it was quite difficult even to shut the door.
But things didn't stop there for Alan Clark that night.
You hear the expression of the hairs stands on the back of your neck, stands up on the back of your neck. And I never really believed it. But this really did sort of happen.
Until now, the hauntings at Muncaster have been blamed on the spirit of Tom Skelton, otherwise known as Tom Fool. He was the jester at the castle in the 16th century, and his portrait now hangs in one of the corridors of the castle. By all accounts, Tom Fool had a sadistic sense of humour.
He used to sit underneath the chestnut tree that's outside this front door still, which is 600 years old. And when you came and asked the way back to London, if he didn't like the look of you, he pointed you down to the quicksand instead of over the ford.
We'll never know if Tom Skelton really did send travellers to their deaths in the sands, but one thing is true. Just below the castle, along the River Esk, quicksands do appear at low tide. Legend states that Tom was also responsible for the gruesome murder of a carpenter within the castle grounds, an act he carried out to win favour with his master, Sir William Pennington. Tom Fool's presence pervades the castle. It's at its most disquieting by his macabre portrait. A scowling Tom Fool, he stands beside his will, a document that predicts his own death by drowning. One tourist had a frightening experience while looking at the painting.
He's an evil-looking man, isn't he?
She was convinced that she'd heard footsteps on stone, a claim that surprised the local investigator into the hauntings.
When I interviewed her, sometime after the experience, I pointed out to her that the stairs and the corridor were indeed fully carpeted. And she'd never actually realised this, even after the experience, and she'd thought that she'd had a strange experience. She'd never actually made the connection between the stone footsteps and the fact that that wing of the castle is fully carpeted.
The tales of Tom Fool and a headless carpenter make for a good ghost story. But can all the bumps and bangs in the castle really be attributed to a 16th century jester? More recent incidents seem to have nothing to do with Tom Fool. More disturbing than anything that's gone before, these experiences centre on this room in the castle, the tapestry room. James Cartland is an archivist and a family friend of the Penningtons. In the early 80s, he was invited to stay at Muncaster. His hosts put him up in the tapestry room, in a wing of the castle now little used.
I'd heard this sort of strange, difficult to describe it. It was a sort of, as if somebody was talking, but muttering, sort of strange sound. I can't really explain it. I stuck my head up the chimney. I thought, well, it might be the wind in the chimney, but it never is. It was a very, very quiet night, very frosty and quiet. I was the only person in that wing of the castle, so there was nobody else there to make a noise. Absolutely the only person. Everybody else was at the other end. And went back into the room, and it was still going on. And it was more audible by then. I mean, it was definitely a child crying and somebody talking to it, as if a child was ill or something like that. I got back into bed. I never slept a wink. Terrible night.
Unknown to James Cartland, a teenage girl had stayed with her mother at the castle a year earlier. Now a trainee solicitor, she prefers to remain anonymous, but her experience is recreated by actors. The late Lord Carlisle had a similar experience, which he recounted to an ex-curator at the castle.
Lord Carlisle told me that he'd only once stayed in Manchester, and that time he'd been in the tapestry room. And he'd woken up in the middle of the night with the sound of a baby crying in the room, and there was no baby in the room. He said he's never been more terrified in his life. And he was a man who got the MC in the last war, so he wasn't a man who was easily frightened. But he said nothing would get him to stay in Manchester again. That was one thing that was quite certain.
No one testimony is proof that Manchester is haunted, but to investigators, these accounts over a long time add up to an impressive case.
Muncaster not only makes the grade with the witnesses' testimonies, it far surpasses the level of criteria that you're looking for, which basically revolves around the correlation of stories over a vast period of time, or even at the same time if you had a collective experience. Without prior knowledge, that's the key. The only other way you could explain it would be mass collusion, and on that scale, spanning decades, from people that no way ever met each other.
So if Muncaster is haunted, who or what is doing it? In particular, who were the children said to be crying in the tapestry room? It was James Cartland who may have stumbled upon the answer.
I came across some old plans, and I discovered that when the castle was altered in the middle of the 19th century, the room, the tapestry room, had been part of the old nurseries, and that those rooms had been cut up or altered in some way. So I immediately thought, my goodness, those children lived in those rooms. They were the nurseries. It's rather unnerving.
Could the tapestry room be haunted by the cries of children? Certainly the Pennington family had their share of tragedy in the 19th century. Gamel Augustus, the third Lord of Muncaster, lost his only child, Margaret, when she was 11 years old. She was buried in the family church, just a short walk from the castle. Phillida Pennington doesn't know how her distant relative died, nor is she certain that Margaret slept in the tapestry room where the children's cries can now be heard. But she does remember the words of Annie Preston, whose family worked at the castle in Gamel's time.
Annie Preston, who was a lady who lived in the village, who died last year, aged 92, told me that her grandfather put Margaret Elizabeth, the daughter of Gamel, Lord Manchester, into the family tomb. She was the last person to be put in there. And also, he said that she had screaming fits before she died.
As a result of these inexplicable events, Muncaster Castle now finds itself catapulted onto Britain's most haunted list. So much so that the only guests willing to spend the night in the tapestry room nowadays are paranormal investigators. Good night.
all on the Paranormal Channel.
Good evening. For 2,000 years, the miracle stories have been part of Christian tradition. The curing of the sick, the raising of the dead, the feeding of the 5,000. But do miracles still happen today? Every year, millions of devout Christians make their way to shrines such as Lourdes, hoping for a miraculous cure. Tonight, we look at 2 case studies of what believers claim are modern-day miracles. In our second story, the evidence was so convincing that even the Vatican was compelled to take note. But first, the story of a woman who thought she was dying of an incurable disease. Now she's well. But was it a miracle?
Now, we've a grand day for travelling, Marion. Ladies and gentlemen.
Sunday, the 3rd of September, 1989. Marion Carroll begins the journey which will change her life. Diagnosed as severely ill with multiple sclerosis, she was taken from her home in Athlone, County Westmeath, on a pilgrimage to a small village in the west of Ireland.
I've never prayed for a cure in my life, but I did trust the Lord. Whether I lived or I died, he knew what was best for me.
But the story began 20 years ago, when Marion, with a young family to look after, experienced the first signs of a mystery illness.
I woke up one morning and my leg felt numb and there was a pain I had a pain in my leg. I thought it was dancing the night before.
She was sent to a psychiatrist because her doctors in Athlone could find no physical explanation for her problems.
I asked him, is it my nerves? I said, my husband's in the army and he's away a lot, and I have to be mother and father, and I'd like to be able to pull myself together. And he said, no, if all my patients come in like you, I'd be out of a job.
But in 1978, a specialist raised the spectre of a terminal illness.
Mr. Carney says, your wife's got MS. And I said, sorry, doctor, I don't know what MS is. And he says, multiple sclerosis. And I said, I still don't know, because I've never heard that word before.
The disease leads to progressive deterioration, and there is no known cure. Marion began to suffer from kidney infections, blackouts, and the loss of power in her limbs. She became almost completely dependent.
I had a special chair that Marion had to be washed every morning. And I used to put her into the chair and bring her down to the bathroom and shower and put her back in the bed again.
I was just like a baby in a pram. I had to be washed, fed, changed, moved.
As they approached the shrine of Knock in County Mayo, Marion was at an all-time low.
Her husband told me that Marion didn't want to go, that she was after getting one of these kidney infections. You know, I felt myself, well, she can't have a whole lot of time left. I wondered to myself, was it going to be a waste of time bringing her at all even? But we carried on.
The Shrine of Our Lady in Knock draws over 1 million pilgrims every year. They come to visit the place where the Virgin Mary is believed to have appeared to 15 villagers in 1879. Marion was brought here to the reception ward for invalid pilgrims. Sadie Feely, one of the handmaids who nursed the sick at Knock, took charge of her.
She knows sight, very poor sight, very poor speech. She no use in one hand and very little use in the other. Marion was really dying. Now, I mean, that's not, I'm not saying anything extreme now when I say that. Marion was critically ill.
The sick are brought into the basilica to be anointed, and it was here that Marion was taken on the afternoon of the 3rd of September, 1989.
Put me in the centre, right under the statue of Our Lady of Knock, and I said to her, you're a mother too, you know how I feel. I knew I was going to die, and I had been praying, asking Jesus and Mary to let me live long enough to see Cora and Anthony out of their teenage years.
Marion felt restless throughout the service, but it was at communion that her remarkable experiences began.
Body of Christ.
After I received Holy Communion, I got a very bad pain in both my heels, which was very unusual. And I realised something, that I received Holy Communion normal, which I hadn't been able to do in a long, long time. Also that pain that came in my heels, that pain went, and when that pain went, every pain in my body went with it.
It was during the blessing of the sick at benediction that Marion experienced her most intense feelings.
And when he came in front of the stretcher and he held it up and he blessed me, it was at that time I got this beautiful feeling, a magnificent feeling, and like a whispery breeze telling me that if the stretcher was open, that I could get up and walk.
Marion was returned to the ward, where a doctor's wife was one of 2 witnesses to the miracle she claims.
Nuala, would you think I was crazy if I said I thought I could walk?
Not at all, Marion. It's been a long day. You must be tired out now. You'll be away home soon.
No, I really think I can. Would you ever undo the straps?
I can't do that, Marion. I'd have to get a nurse. Shall I fetch Maureen?
Yeah, do.
All right. I said I would ask Nurse Maureen, which we did, and it was Maureen who came over and opened her straps.
Now, Marion, can I help you?
I mean, I want to get up. I think I can walk.
No, Marion, you know you can't.
But I have the strangest feeling. Something happened in there. Please undo the straps.
All right, Marion.
I thought maybe she'd been a long time lying on the stretcher and that the straps were tight. So I said I'd undo the straps for her, and then she wanted me to take the blankets off.
Take it easy, Marion.
Mind.
Take it easy, be careful.
She tried to move her legs off the stretcher.
Oh, mind.
Easy, Marion, be careful.
We gave her, I suppose, a little help.
Good girl. Easy.
Leave me now, I can do it myself. No, leave me.
We were trying to help her and she kept doing this. Go away and don't touch me.
I can do it myself.
She had a catheter and urine bag and they were dragging on the floor and I really didn't know what to do with her.
When I stood up and knocked, just right in front of me, I seen my own heart, and it was so full of joy and peace. It was like looking directly into the sun.
The Carroll family immediately contacted their parish priest with news of the cure.
When I got the phone message, I just took it for granted that Marion was either dead or dying. Marion's cure and miracle was just as spectacular and sensational as any of the great gospel miracles.
6 years on, Marion Carroll has not had an ache or a pain. But was her recovery a miracle? Such claims are dealt with first by the Knock Medical Bureau.
Marion arrived very disabled and went home perfectly cured, as testified by her own personal physician the following day. For someone to make such a dramatic and instant cure immediately raises medical interest as to exactly what was going on here.
It's Dr. Murray's job to establish whether Marion's recovery can be explained medically.
It has been the experience sometimes looking at cases of people who've been cured, we find that in point out they have not been suffering from what they thought they were. Perhaps there is no more difficult disease to get a variance of opinion among the medical profession, particularly in the early stages, than multiple sclerosis.
Thy will be done. Amen.
Marion's medical records show that there were doubts about the diagnosis in Marion's case. In 1981, one specialist noted mild multiple sclerosis with functional overlay, suggesting that Marion was exaggerating her symptoms. But the records also document her deterioration in walk and muscular power, and many other signs of the disease.
Like a 2-year-old. Oh, right here.
Marion's recovery has puzzled many doctors, including her own GP, Dr. Patrick O'Mara.
It was an incredible sight. I can't explain it. I don't think anybody can at this stage. It was something that I certainly had never seen before, and I'm unlikely to see again.
The doctors involved in Marion's case will attend a medical commission at the shrine next year. If they cannot explain her recovery, it'll be left to the church to decide what happened at Knock that day.
Sometimes we actually need to feel, touch and see God's love because we're so human. That's why I'm sitting here now with you talking. It's not my gift, it's a gift to the people. Why he chose me, I don't know.
Skeptics might say that Marion's recovery is no more than a remission, a common feature of MS. But doctors in her case point out that remissions are normally not as complete and rarely last as long. The jury is still out in Marion's case. This is a book of saints, but it's already out of date. A new saint may be proclaimed at any time. Candidates for sainthood have to be officially investigated and approved by Rome. A would-be saint has to have proof of 1 or 2 miracles attributed to their power of intercession. No miracles, no sainthood. Tonight, our second story takes us to Philadelphia, to a family that prayed for just such a miracle and got one.
You ready to go for a bike ride? Want to see the ducks down at the river, Becca? Good.
35-year-old Robert Gutterman lives with his family in Philadelphia.
Look at the pretty flowers there on the tree.
He believes he owes his life to a miracle. 20 years ago, he was rushed to St. Christopher's Hospital in severe pain. What began as a simple earache had turned into a brush with death.
This young man had what we call an acute mastoid infection. When the doctor examined his ear on the operating room table, he found that part of the bone that separates the ear to the brain had already been destroyed, exposing the covering of the brain, which is called the dura mater. Now, if the infection had progressed just a little bit more, the boy would have ended up with either a meningitis or a brain abscess and death.
After the operation, the doctors told Robert's mother they believed they had saved her son's life, but his hearing would be permanently damaged. Mrs. Gutterman, a devout Catholic, prayed for his recovery. Ear surgeon Dr. Miles Tertz had been forced to abandon the operation and was expecting further problems.
There was so much disease, I made the judgment, the decision, that the best I could do would be to clean it out as much as possible and stay away from all those things that could give him serious, significant, or conceivably life-threatening complications from the procedure.
But there was a remarkable development on the very evening of the operation.
Who's calling me? Somebody's calling my name.
No, Bobby. It's just a noise outside.
But I heard somebody calling me.
It's not you, Bobby. It's just somebody else in the corridor. Now go back to sleep. Go back to sleep now.
Mrs. Gutterman was convinced that against all the odds, her son's hearing was perfect.
Nurse?
Well, I remember the next morning when the doctor came in, my mother had told him that I can hear. And I remember him looking and saying, no, we already told you that there's too much damage there and that he'd never be able to hear out of that ear.
But Mrs. Gutterman's certainty that a miracle had happened to her son persuaded Dr. Tertz to carry out an immediate test. The results showed a return to normal hearing.
I have no explanation. If you ask me, what did I do to get that outcome? I will tell you, I didn't do anything to get that outcome.
Thank you, Doctor.
So extraordinary was Robert Gutterman's recovery that the Archdiocese of Philadelphia set up a series of special tribunal hearings to examine the case in detail.
The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen. We ask you for the strength and wisdom we need to carry out our task today. We pray this through Jesus Christ.
Acting on rules set down by Rome for the investigation of miracle claims, the tribunal set about interviewing key witnesses.
Do you swear to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to all the questions placed before you?
I do, Father.
What is your name?
Beatrice Marie Gutterman.
And what is your relationship with Robert?
I am his mother.
Dr. Tertz set out the clinical picture to the tribunal.
Well, the mastodectomy showed an ear which was filled with granulation and a middle ear which was also filled with granulation, and none of the ossicles could be identified because of the disease.
The ossicles are small bones in the middle ear, crucial for hearing. They seemed to have grown back.
The doctor was absolutely amazed. When he examined him, he said, "I don't believe it. I don't believe it. He is actually reconstructing anatomy." I asked what that meant, and he said that the flesh was fusing together to repair the hole in the drum. He asked what we did that his other patients don't do. Both Robert and I said, "We pray."
Having exhausted all the medical possibilities, the tribunal required evidence that prayer had been instrumental in the cure. Mrs. Gutterman told the tribunal how she had turned to the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament Order near her home.
Sister, may I please speak with you?
She knew us because her son had been an altar boy here. And so she came to us to ask the Lord to help him bear the pain. That was the first thing. Then she asked if he could only be well.
The nuns prayed to the founder of their order, Mother Catherine Drexel, who died in 1955. She was an heiress who gave away a fortune to the poor. The sisters believed strongly in her power to bring about healings.
I can't explain the hearing. The only way I can explain it is that the hearing was lost, and now it's there. Whatever he was doing in that middle ear, I would love to take a look at that middle ear now.
Is his hearing...
The tribunal agreed that Robert should be asked to submit to another examination of his ear, which would show once and for all if the damage really had repaired itself.
That. People out in the sun and all, huh? Here's the doctor down
It was now 13 years since the original operation. The new test on Robert's ear was conducted with the latest technology. The examination was carried out by one of America's foremost ear specialists, Professor Louis Lowry. Against all expectations, there were no signs of the earlier damage.
This is the eardrum here, and this is the malleus here, which is the first ossicle or bone. And we could, when we examined Robert Gutterman, we could see this tympanic membrane or the eardrum, which appeared normal. We could also see the malleus. And so just from physical exam externally, it looked quite normal. What's the explanation from no ossicles in 74 to normal ossicles in 87? I keep repeating, I don't make the judgment what's a miracle and what's not, but it's certainly not explainable by my medical career.
We, as non-clergy, do not have the right to deal in miracles, but to the best of our knowledge, we felt it was something that we could not explain.
The Archdiocese of Philadelphia had shown there was a miracle case to answer. Now it was the turn of Rome to provide the final say. The Vatican's archives contain the records of miracle investigations going back to the 16th century. The evidence in the Gutterman case was painstakingly re-examined by Rome's own medical and theological experts. The process is rigorous, and many cases fail at this final stage.
Quite an amount of study by highly qualified experts is necessary. That is the most important requirement, because we do believe in miracles, but we are not eager to presume a miracle. It has to be proved and proved up to the hill. If there is any lingering doubt, we will just cast it out.
The next stage was for Robert's case to be heard by the cardinals of the Congregation for the Causes of Saints in the Vatican's Apostolic Palace. We were allowed a brief glimpse of their secret deliberations. It was this committee that passed Robert's case unanimously in 1987.
After all the preparations, it goes to the Holy Father, and he signs the decree. He is ultimately in all these matters the final judge. When he puts his signature under it, the thing is official, and only then it's official.
Robert's cure was declared miraculous by the Pope. The decree put Catherine Drexel on the road to sainthood. She was beatified in a ceremony in Rome in 1988, attended by the Gutterman family.
Well, the guys at work were kind of shocked when I ended up on the 6 o'clock news. They looked at you and they sort of said, well, gee, Bob, you're the regular guy. You know, you go out and you have a couple beers with the boys, and you know, how could this be? You know, and it gets very kind of difficult because God doesn't just show up to the holy people or to, you know, the worst of people. God loves us all equally.
The Blessed Catherine Drexel needs one more miracle attributed to her, and then she'll become Saint Catherine. And Robert Gutterman, well, he remains one of those rare hospital patients who can honestly say he's had a miraculous recovery. Good night.
Strange but true.
Good evening. There are strange tales that run through many different human societies and exert such a hold on our imagination that they pop up time and time again. Tonight we look at two of those legends. The phantom hitchhiker is a modern myth, the stranger who appears at the roadside, accepts a ride and then disappears. But first, a more ancient belief, the power of the curse, like the Earls of North Esk, who were haunted by a green lady whose appearance at Ethy Castle in Tayside means one of them will die. But our example tonight is a Celtic tale that happened not so very long ago.
The remote and beautiful islands of the Outer Hebrides. Their isolation means they've been only lightly touched by the 20th century. The islands are much as they were when the Vikings first landed over 1,000 years ago. And the old superstitions are still a part of everyday life.
We're very religious. Whether we're Christian or not, we're very, very religious. Even those who perhaps have abandoned God are still got that superstitious side to their natures. This is all very much part of our makeup, and graveyards particularly.
In this ancient and overgrown burial place, within the grounds of the ruined Howmore Chapel, lie the remains of the clan of Clanranald, buried here since 1490. Ranald MacDonald is the 24th chief of Clan Ranald. He believes the clan has its own special protection.
Sad thing is that anybody who actually tampers with the property of the clan have never really had any advantage, and often has not had, met with some evilness, and the property has always been returned.
There are those who believe that many of the ancient medieval artifacts on the Hebrides have strange mystical powers.
The modern word might be curse, but I would like to use something more remote than that. It is something that holds the whole spirit together, because we've been going so many, many centuries.
Whatever it is, the power of the curse has reappeared throughout the history of the clan. During the 1745 uprising, redcoat soldiers broke into the clan's island graveyard, intent on stealing the valuable St. Finan's bell.
Come back, you scum!
But the bell was to be their downfall. Whatever they did, it refused to stop its eerie, persistent ring and attracted the attention of the local caretaker. St. Finan's bell was returned to the Clan Ranald clan, its rightful home.
St. Finan's bell has been taken twice during the last couple of centuries. Both times, I'm told, the people who've taken it have met an unhappy end, but the bell has always returned to the altar.
The clan believes that whenever its property has been threatened, the curse has returned. The Clan Ranald stone bears the ancient symbols of the clan and marks the resting place of Alan Moidart, famous chief and protector of the clan who died 400 years ago. A reproduction of the gravestone was built into the walls of the clan's castle by French stonemasons in 1708. The castle took 7 years to build, but was occupied for only 7 years. On the night before the clan chief died in battle, the castle was consumed by fire. Still, the stone survived. But more recently, there was a further threat to its existence.
Early one morning, about 4 or 5 years ago, the man who runs the home farm heard this chipping, and he looked towards the castle ruins, and there was a man trying to prise out the armorial stone with a hammer and a chisel. So he just chased him for his life. We don't know to this day who he was.
It seemed that the legend of the clan was again protecting all its ancient monuments. But then disaster struck. The clan's most important relic, the Moidart gravestone, was stolen.
It was one morning when my niece wanted to go and look at the stone, and we went into the graveyard, and she said, "It's not here." I said, "Of course it's there, just move along round the corner," but it wasn't there. Later, one of the crofters showed me a mark where the stone had obviously been dragged from the graveyard all the way along, several hundred yards, to the parking place outside the church.
As shockwaves hit the community, people wondered how the 300-weight gravestone could have been stolen without detection.
To get it out, well, they must have used a small crowbar or something, and I mean, it's within the wit of man, but it would have been quite a difficult, determined journey to get that from chapel to boot of car.
Amongst the islanders, the theft reawakened memories of the old clan legends.
Well, the local people knew that to desecrate any graveyard is really bad, and because they were so shocked, they knew that no good end would come to the story.
The search for the stone continued, but only one man knew where it was hidden, in a tiny London bedsit. The legends had said the grave robber would be doomed to an early death. Would the curse prove to be simply a quaint piece of history? The clan chief never stopped believing in its power.
In terms of the clan, which was nearly 1,000 years, it wasn't a long time that it had gone, and I wasn't that concerned that it had gone forever. I thought that it would turn up sooner or later, somehow or other.
It was to be 5 years before the clan heard any news. The first signs of the missing gravestone surfaced here at the British Museum.
I was working late one night in February in the museum, and I got a phone call from the information desk. They told me there was a gentleman there who urgently wanted to see someone. They said he was a little upset. And so I spoke to him over the phone, and he came down to the department. We get all sorts of inquiries on the duty desk in the department, but this was one of the most curious stories that I've been involved in. He showed me a photo of a carved stone, which he said was in a nearby flat in Euston. He said his son had been on holiday some years previously on South Uist and had found it in a field and brought it back to London. He was in London for his son's funeral. His son had died quite suddenly a week or so previously.
On the 22nd of February 1995, almost 5 years to the day since the stone was stolen, 33-year-old Lauren Mabon died alone in a London flat. Only a few feet away from his bed was the stone of Clanranald. The coroner's verdict was death by misadventure.
I was not surprised, but when it was found in these circumstances, I said it's a sort of thing that might have happened in the Celtic world, not in the heart of London.
When I first heard that the stone was found, of course, I was delighted. But as information gathered, I was little concerned and saddened and slightly spooked by the fact of the boy's death. And it rather brought reminiscences of, various things I'd heard and the history of our clan.
Beneath the disquiet, there was some sympathy for the outsider who'd stolen the island's heritage.
Remember, everybody who live in our cities are searching for roots. They would do anything to catch up with roots, because a lot of people nowadays in the last 100 years have lost their roots and are wandering about the surface of the earth aimlessly, whereas we can describe the people we came from back to 7, 8, 9 generations.
So it was that on the night of June the 10th, 1995, the clan gathered at the quayside for the stone's return to its ancestral home on South Uist. Its final journey from London was almost complete. It was to arrive as it had left, in the boot of a car. The following day, the island turned out to celebrate. Among them, Neil Macmillan from the local Historical Society, who was there to give a Gaelic welcome.
They're very proud that the stone has come back, and it's been the story behind it is really out of the world how it found its way back. But people are delighted that it is back, and it's here to stay now.
And perhaps this time, the curse of the Clanranald clan will finally have been laid to rest.
Some will dismiss the story as superstitious nonsense, but the clan leaders have managed to stay in power for nearly 1,000 years, so maybe Clanranald do have something watching over them. If you haven't heard a phantom hitchhiker story, then someone you know probably has. It's become a modern myth, a story so appealing it's destined to be told and retold, despite the fact that concrete evidence is hard to come by. But if it was possible to track down those who'd experienced it at first hand, would their evidence stand up to closer examination? Well, tonight we talk to some individuals who say they gave a ride to a phantom hitchhiker.
Maria Roux and Giel Pretorius had recently become engaged, and on Good Friday in March 1968 were driving through the arid scrub of the Karoo Desert, 200 miles east of Cape Town. They were going to meet her parents to discuss their wedding plans. The route was taking them towards Uniondale along the N9.
Hi, you want a lift? Are you alright? Where are you going? You know, you ought to be careful. It's dangerous out here for a young girl like you. Where are you?
Puzzled and frightened, Anton Lechronchi headed straight for the police station in the nearest town, Uniondale. Today, the station is run by Warrant Officer Moschert.
Sergeant Potgieter was on duty. He was alone on duty.
Sir, you got a problem?
When Mr. Lechronchi came in, he told Sergeant Potgieter about experience he had on the road.
I was driving into town and I stopped to pick up this girl hitchhiking. I don't know, man. She just disappeared.
What exactly do you mean, just disappeared?
Sergeant Potgieter didn't believe the man. And he think the man wants to waste his time.
No, man, you've been drinking.
I swear to you, I've never been more sober in my life. I'm sorry. Listen, please just come out there with me. Let's see what
Sensing
happens.
that Lechronchi was not joking, Snowy Potgieter agreed to go back with him to the spot.
Sergeant Potgieter, he didn't rattle in situations. But in this specific situation, he rattled.
Did you see that?
Yeah, you fiddling with the door.
I didn't touch it. It wasn't just that. Did you hear the woman laughing?
Look, Mr. Lechronchi, I'm getting tired and impatient. Now we'll drive past there once more. This time, you put the interior light on, you put your hands on the steering wheel. I'll be right behind you and I'll be watching. Hey, and lock your doors.
Did you see that?
Jan, listen, let's just get the hell out of here, man.
When Sergeant Potgieter came back, he was snow white in his face and he was rattled. So he left the police station, he locked the station and went home.
For Snowy, the description of the girl had stirred some unsettling memories.
At about 8 o'clock Sunday morning, Snowy confronted me and said, "Do I remember this girl that was killed in the Sydney accident a few years ago?"
Pat MacDonald had been the first officer to the scene of the crash that day.
I found a Volkswagen Beetle off the road, and a girl was lying on her back with her head against the one embankment. She had died of head injuries. I later ascertained that her name was Maria Roux. The driver survived. I explained to him what the girl actually looked like, which was exactly the same description that was in the Kran's book given by Lechronchi.
The word spread around Uniondale like wildfire. There was a phantom hitchhiker on the N9. Within days, the newspapers had got hold of the story and contacted Maria Roux's mother.
I told her about the story and that the people thought it's her daughter that is haunting in Uniondale area. And she gave me, she said, "Fine, I can get a photograph of her."
Anton Lechronchi was asked if he could recognize the girl he'd given a lift to. Would he pick out Maria?
That's her. That's her.
Uniondale's phantom hitchhiker had been identified as Maria Rue. There were no more sightings of her until 2 years later. Corporal Dave van Jaarsveld was doing his national service at Oudtshoorn Army Base, 100 miles from Uniondale. He was on his way there